Welcome back for part 2 of my interview with Rich Dansky. We were talking about his most recent book that will be coming out soon, so let's pick up there. Having read it, I've also pre-ordered it, and I can't wait to get it, but I can attest that you don't pull any punches. It's not a tell-all. You're not out to like even scores with anyone or anything, but you don't hesitate to examine idiocy and Dunning-Kruger stuff that you've encountered in the industry. You don't name names necessarily, but it's the real stories. It's the real deal.
It is my experience, and yes, some of it has been abstracted, but my feeling is that unless we call out the behaviors that are counterproductive, they're never going to be addressed. They're going to keep on happening. The work is going to continue to be less than as good as it could be. People's working experiences are going to be worse than they could be. So I would rather step up and say, hey, this thing that we've been doing for 30 years isn't great. Let's stop doing that. Here's why it's not great. Do you understand? And, that might make some people uncomfortable. People get invested in the way they do things. People don't like to be told, hey, your solution isn't the best solution. But at the same time, that conversation needs to be had. Because otherwise we're going to keep on making the same old mistakes over and over and over again.
My language tends to change very much depending on where someone is in their own progression in their career. When I'm talking to a junior, it's like, have you thought about this could be stronger? I see what you're trying to do, and then the more advanced you get, by the time, if I'm your narrative director and you're my lead writer, it's like, hey, were you even really trying? No, I'm kidding. I never said that to anyone, but it can get very very quick and very off the cuff because we've known each other a long time. We respect each other, and yeah.
Well, I always try to be actionable in everything I say.
Yeah.
I don't want to be prescriptive unless it is last minute and I need to bring the hammer down and we need this dialogue done now, in which case I will say, I want this, or I will say, I'm sorry, I have to take this over.
Yeah.
And I try to avoid doing that whenever possible. But if there's time to iterate, I want the writer I'm working with to find their solution. I want to give them guidance. I want to give them direction. I want to explain what I'm looking for and why I want it, because I think the why is key. What this line is supposed to achieve is absolutely key. But the thing is, I don't want me to write it.
Right.
If I hire a writer, it's because of what they can bring that is unique to the table. They have their own voice. They have their own experience. They have their own method of speaking, of writing. And I want them to bring that to the table. And so we get more flavors. We get more voices. We get more talent going in. I don't want anyone to be a pair of hands for me. I don't want anyone to go, to play, I'm thinking of a script. No, that's not it. If you're in the building, you're in the building for a reason. It's because I want to see what you can do with this, not what I would have done with it.
Let's push on that for a second. So you mentioned that like what you want from a writer on your team is a different perspective, a different voice to bring themselves to it. When you are looking to hire that, so that's obviously one of the things. What kinds of things do you look for in a writer?
The first thing that I look for is an understanding of what it takes to write games. And that is the deal breaker right there. You have to understand that you are not writing a novel. You are not writing a movie. You are not writing a comic book. As wonderful as those are, and as great as you may be at those forms, they're not what we're doing. You have to understand the interactive nature. You have to be willing to put the ego aside to say, what is the player going to get out of this? And that is the baseline that I look for. Beyond that, I want to look for someone who understands that what they're writing is for other people to pick up and use. If you write a character description, it should not be, 2 sentences of what they look like and 20 paragraphs of their deep personal history. It should be, okay, the concept artist is going to need to pick this up. What do they need to do with it? The animators are going to need to pick this up. Let's describe how that character moves. The voice director is going to need to pick this up. Let's talk about how they speak. And doing that, understanding that what you're doing is not the be all and end all, that it's a cog in a big machine, and that you should be writing to the people who are going to hear you and need to hear you, as opposed to yourself. And that's that's the start. Then we start looking at technical proficiency. On a certain level, some technical proficiency can be taught, some can't. Obviously, I would prefer if you can write really well when you walk in the door, but if I can see potential that I can train up, I'm willing to work with that. And I want to see a unique voice. I want to see, what do you have to say about this? What are you thinking? What's your process in writing this character? Do you go to the why, or do you just grab the character you saw in the last movie
Right.
and slap a new coat of paint on that? Do you have an understanding of what this character wants that you're writing, as opposed to just giving us another generic action hero? And so, yeah, it's a complicated process. And when I'm looking for samples, I go all over the map. I will ask for a character description. I will ask for a cinematic script. And I will keep an eye on, okay, have you written a cinematic scene or a movie scene? Because they're different things. And I will say, hey, can you write 10 variants on Arg, he shot me? Because that's part of the job too. And it's an important part of the job. And if you show you can work with that, and you can work with that in a way that says it's you working with that, then I want to hire you.
So keep pushing along in that same vein, I'm curious, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see young folks making, either when they're trying to get into the industry? So maybe you've met some at GDC who are like, I want to be a game writer, or people who have just gotten in, maybe they've gotten their first big job, or they did a couple of indie things and now they're on a bigger team. Do you see, or are there common mistakes that you see across multiple folks?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of it starts with the portfolio, and there's a lot of common mistakes in the portfolio. Once you start with writing inappropriate samples and having it in there. And I'm not saying that I've gotten softcore pornography as a writing sample for a Tom Clancy game, but I'm not saying I didn't either. And so know what you're applying for. Your portfolio is not a granite monolith. It is an ever-changing thing. Put the stuff in there that's going to show you to best effect, to show that you are the right person to work on this game. And you don't have one portfolio. You have a bunch of portfolios for each job you're applying for. And you should always be pulling the worst work out and putting new, better work in. I've seen people who didn't understand what it was like to work on a team. And that, particularly folks jumping up from a smaller team to a bigger team, who didn't understand that it's more than just more people in the room. That there are just very different processes when you're handling a team of 500 people as opposed to a team of 50. And understanding how to work with that change has thrown a bunch of people. And there's always the folks who think that it starts with the writer. And that's, I mean, it would be lovely, but that's just not the way it works. And you have to get people to understand that they are part of creating the player experience. They are not the originator, the way the script is the originator in the film or in a comic book, or the written word is the originator in a novel. And that's, some people are great at adapting to that new mindset. Some people can never wrap their heads around it. That doesn't make them bad writers, just makes them not right to be writing games.
Yeah, not game writers. Yeah. It's interesting because my first game writing job was at BioWare in 2004 on Jade Empire. And weirdly, that was this weird moment in time where at BioWare, it did start with the writer, and you sort of planned out the structure of your entire chapter narratively. And then you went to the level designers and everyone else, and you sort of, that was the skeleton of the chapter. And that was a lot of fun, but I have never really, except on Mass Effect 2 later, but again, at BioWare, I've never really experienced that elsewhere. It's much more what you say. And I think that's honestly just the universal experience at this point, is that it's always going to be, starting with an entire team of people and building it with a team of people.
Yeah. And even if you're lucky enough to get in at the very beginning of conception, which I've been lucky enough to have the chance to do a few times, even then it's horse trading. It's, hey, we have this feature we want to show off. Hey, we have these environments we want to show off. Hey, we have this tool that we want to use. And so it comes back to narrative, say, okay, what sort of story can I propose that takes advantage of all of this? And while that's a far cry from the days of, the early Tom Clancy stuff I worked on, where I would literally say, get told, hey, we've got an airport, a cruise ship, an island estate, and a meat packing plant. And you need to come up with 6 more missions, but you need to use at least 3 of the ones we've already got multiple times.
Yeah.
And that was the way it was done in those days,
Yeah.
or at least on those projects. But at this point, still, if you're in early enough, even then, you have to take everybody else's needs and the project's needs and the company's needs into account, and then take that into your mix and transform it and say, okay, here's 5 pitches that I can give you based on the elements that you're giving me. Which ones do you like? Which ones do you not like? I can combine. I can come up with new. I can throw stuff out, and then iterate with folks of goodwill to get that.
Yeah, I think that process you described, where they have like 5 or 6 levels that they just designed because they thought they'd be cool levels, and then at the very end, they bring the writer in and go, okay, now come up with a story that connects these. I feel like outside of BioWare, that was the norm back then, and I think the fact that you were in-house was actually probably kind of a luxury, because I do know of some writers who would just be brought in as a contractor in the last 4 months of development. like here you go. Yeah, this level's on the moon. This other one's in a city underwater in the Atlantic. Yeah, figure out how that happens.
Yep.
Which again returns to that idea of writing being a very lonely thing,
Yeah. And that also ties into the concept of the narrative wrapper, which I hate with the burning passion of 10,000 fiery suns, because the wrapper is the thing that goes around something. At the very best, you get a little melted cheese on it, but it's a wrapper. It's not of the thing. It's around the thing.
Right.
What we do is not around the thing. It is part of the thing. If your narrative gets slapped on top, people will know. People will recognize that. People will recognize that there are no emotional stakes. People will recognize that this is not a complete experience in a lot of ways. And so I hate the narrative wrapper concept, because it doesn't benefit anybody. Narrative should be an ingredient in the mix. It's not the only ingredient. It's not the lead ingredient, but it's an ingredient. And I hate the notion of narrative versus gameplay fight, because that's nonsense. Narrative and gameplay together make the player experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, not to be maximalist, but I think it has to be more than a wrapper, not just should be. I think players sense it when it's just some kind of a thing that's been added on at the end. And then you always get these comments like, well, the story was so shallow or predictable or whatever, because of the narrative wrapper. And by the way, can you imagine going to a designer and saying, well, the design wrapper for this game?
Yeah, but again, that goes back to they don't understand what we do and how it can provide benefit and what the process is. But yeah, I mean, for many years of my career, I was basically on an episode of Chopped on every project. Okay, you've got a basket. Let's see what's in it.
Yeah, a phrase I came to hate as much as you hate narrative wrapper is wordsmithing. When people would say, "Oh, can you wordsmith this?" Right? I was like, that's a sign that you think I'm like a vowel guy. Like I'm all about the consonants,
Yeah, and I apologize for using that word earlier, and you have my deepest apologies.
Oh, I don't think you did, actually. I did. Yeah, I didn't hear it. Yeah, and I would have been triggered. So, all right, you're a prolific writer outside of games, and one thing I'm curious about, something I experienced when I first became a full-time writer, having been a storyboard artist for years who would come home from work and write at night all the time. When I first became a game writer, for at least a year or two, I didn't write anything outside of work. I just was empty at the end of the day. I had nothing left. And I've had a number of other game narrative folks mention that to me as well. So I'm really curious, if you went through something like that, although I know you were a professional writer before games in tabletop, before video games. But I'm curious if you went through something like that, and what your energy source is there, and maybe some of your habits to be able to write so much outside of your day-to-day job.
Really, what it comes down to is I came to the understanding that writing for games uses one set of muscles and writing fiction uses a very different set of muscles. And once I could understand that separation for myself, I could build on that. Writing for games, I don't need to write description. We have artists for that. I don't need to write interior monologue. I don't need adverbs. There's never a need for an adverb in a video game. And okay, I hate adverbs in general, but that's a whole other story. But in fiction, I can tell the stories I can't tell in games, and vice versa. I can do the stuff that's mood and tone and slow build of dread when I'm writing my horror in a way that the games I was working on absolutely did not afford. And so I saw that separation, and I worked very hard to make that separation explicit. And I made that separation physically explicit as well. For the longest time, I'd go into the office and I'd do the game work there, and I would stop writing game stuff when I came home, and I'd have dinner and whatever else. And then I'd go into my office and I'd do my personal writing ritual. And I believe a writing ritual is absolutely vital just to train your brain that now it is writing time. And that would get me into the fiction writing space or the tabletop RPG writing space that was so different from the video game writing space. And even when COVID hit or when I started working remote, I made sure that my work stuff was happening downstairs and my personal writing was happening upstairs. And that there would be a separation. There would be a break. There would be a divider between the two of them. And so I will get up in the morning and I will write for work, and I will do all that, and I will do it in a certain way that is conducive to my writing that stuff. And then in the evening, I will go up to my office. I will turn off all the lights. I will light a candle. I will take off my watch and put it to the right of my computer in the same space every time. Mm-hmm. And then I will start the playlist that I have for that given writing project, because every writing project I've got has a musical playlist that goes with it. Mm-hmm. I will listen to that for 10 minutes, and then my brain will go, right, let's go.
Wow. That's all. Do you put on a silk robe? I feel like the picture you painted would be made perfect by like a silk robe, but
the brandy sniffer and
of course,
Fizz, and I just full Sydney Greenstreet. Yeah, there we go.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you find?
No.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. It's just that tells my brain now it's writing time. Mm-hmm. And that is so invaluable because it shortcuts all the farting around and all the, maybe I should check my fantasy baseball team and all that other stuff. That gets me, that mainlines writing brain.
Right.
If I can butcher a metaphor there.
That's very much a real thing. I find, I should point out that I think this is true in the workplace as well, that there are, there's kind of prompts that you can give your brain to sort of accelerate getting into a flow state for writing or just whatever. It's harder in the office because you got people coming by your desk or whatever. But do you find that working on your own stuff sort of complements your work? Like, do you think you're a better game writer because you write your own stuff at night, or a better novelist because you work as a game writer during the day, or are they just two completely separate universes?
They are largely separate, but in the words of one of my most important writing mentors, an author named Mort Castle, who said to me, Rich, your first million words are shit. Get them out of your system as quickly as possible. And what he didn't mean is that word 1,000,001 was going to be pure gold. What he meant was practice writing. Constantly put words down. And the more you do that, the more you'll instinctively understand what words go together, what ones don't, what flows, what doesn't. And while the types of writing I'm doing on video games on this side and fiction on the other are distinct, the technique of putting words down, that has made me better at both. And being able to get this idea out over here and this idea out over there, that has made me a better writer for both.
Two last questions for you. One, the second to last, because I don't want to end on a grim note, but I think we should talk about the massacre currently going on in our industry. Games. I've been a creative for about 30 years, but I've been in games for just under 20. And I certainly have never seen it this bad. That there have been massive layoffs and they just keep coming. Before we can all sort of really recover from the shock of the last major round. Meanwhile, um, people are still playing games. A lot of people are playing a lot of games, so it's kind of a strange situation. And with the caveat that neither you nor I are business analysts, just curious what your take is on these layoffs, and if you have any sense of what it's about, because I think a lot of us are not even really sure what it's about, and what you think might happen with this, or basically whatever interesting thoughts you have on this dark time.
Well, this is where my old Tom Clancy brain comes into play, just because that filling that role trained me to dive deep into subjects that weren't necessarily initially of interest to me, but were of import, and trying to figure out how to separate wheat from chaff and where logical explanations might be. And I think there's two things that I think really need to be addressed. One is that we are not alone in this. This is symptomatic of late stage capitalism and profit taking. And there is a model at the very highest level of the investor class where they want to get their hooks into something, extract as much value as they can as quickly as possible, and then move on, leaving whatever wreckage they can behind because they don't care, because they're moving on to the next thing. And they don't care about the long term benefit. They don't care about long term profit stream, because they want what they want right now. And they would rather have 10 million right now rather than a game that gives you 8 million a year for 5 years, because 10 is more than 8 right now. And that, I think, is a short-sighted and ultimately fallacious approach, because sooner or later you run out of stuff to pillage. And if you keep on firing people, there's nobody left to buy your stuff. But right now, it's very much about what can I get right now? And it's the moment of acquisition that matters, as opposed to the consequence. And at the same time, I think in many places there's been a failure of leadership in the industry. The folks making the games, the devs, we have been forced to consistently improve our craft. And I'm not sure that I've always seen that happening at the corporate levels, at the studio head levels. When I see team after team after team who have made financially successful games, who clearly know how to make a game that people want and will pay money for, being shut down because of corporate structuring, or they need to move, that were, misunderstandings of what a product's going to be, or the stock price needs to be bumped this quarter or whatever. That tells me that there's a disconnect between the people running the business and the people who are making the business.
Yes.
And this is, again, you're right, we're not business guys. And I'm sure people in very nice suits can explain all sorts of stuff to me as to how this is for the greater good. But I just look around and I see people who made people money looking for work.
Yeah.
And the market changes, yes, but people can change with that market. And there's a whole lot of talent out there. And my hope, honestly, is that somebody's going to look around and say, here's a market inefficiency. There is all this talent sitting there.
Yeah.
Let's line them up and give them some backing and give them some new leadership and see what they can do, because there's clearly an opportunity. And by the way, I do want to say that just the folks I work with at Romero Games, I absolutely fabulous. So
yeah. So if you're a hiring manager, you see Romero Games on a LinkedIn, assume it's a good person. Yes. Yeah, and I think you're touching on something there that is really the fact that there's people who know how to make good games, who are all unemployed, and aside from the sheer human cost of it, which is the worst part of it, but another aspect that's just so puzzling to me is there's so many people out there that love games who are deeply dissatisfied with all the games that are coming out. You mentioned this sort of like there's these two groups. There's the unemployed people who know how to make games, and then there's the people making decisions. But there's this third group of players who I think there's a large number of people that would be happy to buy a game that they really love and play 300 or 1,000 hours of it, and they can't seem to find one. And that's the weird part of this opportunity thing.
Yeah, because the decisions are being handed down, the mandates are being handed down. do all these things, maximize the money extraction model, maximize the money monetization in a way that makes it for a less fun experience. And this is me, and I have no data here, but I'm willing to gamble that if I create a game that people love and want to play and want to continue to buy content for and want to buy merch for and want to buy transmedia for, then ultimately that's going to be a bigger, more sustainable profit engine and a more reliable profit engine than a short-term cash grab from loot boxes.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think, and the entire history of business, how old is the story of the tortoise and the hare? I think, that's one we all learned as kids. But I think the problem is, as you pointed out, there's this idea of extracting maximum profit and then moving on with just wreckage behind you. So
I mean, with all these games getting killed, what's going to be in the pipeline in 2 years?
Yeah.
What is they're going to be for people to play in 2 years? But they don't care. They'll have moved on by then.
Yeah. But so if you happen to be watching this video and you have hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm sure there's many, and you actually want to build something that will just make you money for a long time, consider the slow and steady approach. So the last thing I wanted to ask about is independent of the bloodletting currently going on in our industry. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on, you've seen game narrative change a lot over the course of your career. As tools, techniques, expertise, everything goes up. I'm just curious what you think, where you think game narrative's going. Do you think that we're kind of like film where the fundamentals are sort of locked in, or are we still in the early stages where we're experimenting and there's a lot more to learn?
I feel that in certain ways we're kind of Billy Batson, which is that in some ways we're kids, but then we got the magic word and all of a sudden we're all grown up and super powerful because we made a lot of money. And we didn't have that natural organic growth in a lot of ways. And so we're still trying to find our language. We're still trying to find our universal definitions of stuff. We're still trying to find our techniques that are transferable from studio to studio to studio, because as well as I do, a lot of stuff, it really is studio centric. At the same time, when I started running those narrative roundtables in 2007, there were some really consistent complaints at every single one of them. They don't talk to us. They only bring us in at the end. We don't have tools. We don't have this. We don't have that. And all of those are now taken for granted. We have seen very concrete progress. And I can go back and I can show you the notes from those roundtables and show you what people were complaining about. And their improvement has been made. The standard practices have improved. There has been progress. People figured out that investing in and improving narrative gave you a return in terms of making a better game that people then wanted to play and buy and whatever else. That being said, there's all new challenges. And I think we would have benefited from perhaps a slightly more organic foundation going forward. At the same time, we've done a great job just as a community in terms of bringing people along and setting folks up to succeed going forward and preparing them for the new challenges. One of the things I love about the game narrative community is just the willingness of folks who are experienced to offer a hand down. I see very, very, very few people who climb up and then kick the ladder behind them. I see so much generosity of spirit, of knowledge, of sharing. And I see people who are willing to say, hey, you're coming up, you're smart, do better than I did. Here's what I know, take it and run with it. And I can't necessarily imagine the nitty gritty of the new challenges. For a while, I thought VR was going to be something that was really going to take off the game space. And that ended up not happening, even though VR presented some incredibly interesting challenges for writing. I thought when Telltale was making its splash, we might see a move towards episodic content, because in a lot of ways it made sense, because so often on a big game, you're building the airplane while you're flying it, and your better content comes in your supplementals because now you understand how everything works and you can write to the contours of the sandbox instead of guessing at what you're going to get. And that was something I thought was going to happen, and obviously it didn't. So my predictions are terrible. But
Yes.
that being said, there is whatever comes along, I think the craft and the community is pretty well positioned to grapple with it, find solutions, and do new and exciting things with it. And I feel I still got a lot to offer, both in terms of mentorship and in terms of my own creativity. But I want to see the next generation and the generation after that take the next steps. I want to see them go beyond. I want to see what they come up with. And I have a lot of faith, which is reinforced by reading these student papers at the competition year after year after year, in their creativity and their intelligence and their perspectives to do stuff that we haven't even dreamed of yet.
That's very well said. That's great. That's an uplifting future to look forward to. So thank you for that.
Quite welcome. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Now, if anyone wants to reach out to you or follow you on is it LinkedIn, or do you have multiple socials? Or
I'm on LinkedIn as Richard Dansky, obviously. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Instagram. I have a website, richarddansky.com. Though for whatever reason, the email link doesn't seem to always work. So apologies for that. But please feel free to reach out to me. And like I said, twice a week on LinkedIn, I just do a bit of content about game narrative that folks seem to like. And I'm always happy to talk about this stuff.
And and I'll include a link to pre-order the book in the description of this video. And so thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
That's it for part 2 of my interview with Rich Dansky. This is a new format for Game Story Basics, and I hope you've enjoyed.